participants with us and 3 of us on our side of the virtual table. So 18 and counting, and I would think that we'll be up to 20 within a few minutes, but we have now hit the hour. So I guess we ought to kick off. I'll say a quick thank you to everybody for rocking up today. 3rd day of this virtual conference, which I'm sure has been memorable and novel and unusual for everybody, speakers and attendees alike. But I've certainly got a lot of value from it, and actually very much enjoyed being able to listen into all of the great content from the comfort of my living room. I'm sure you're the same, Kamalei. I think you said you went to 5 sessions yesterday.
Yeah, amongst meetings and other projects to work on, it's been interesting, but it's been fun. I think I'm really impressed how Bob and his team pulled it off. I really am.
And someone was saying that actually one conspiracy theory that's being thrown out there is that actually Zoom organized this whole crisis and that they are the ones getting the last laugh out of all of this, as we're all leaning on their service so heavily in this time. So hopefully, folks, we will get through today without any technical bother, but the nature of an online conference is that really that could happen at any time. I know that Dan was having some internet challenges earlier today, so we will cross our fingers for smooth sailing through this meeting. But I think, and I'll hand over to Kamalei in a minute, but to kind of introduce and introduce the session as well as herself. But today we're going to try and cover some topics that are very much of the moment. Certainly in the session I did yesterday, I was sort of trying to put a positive spin on the opportunity that we all have now to take a step back and take a time to review some of our content and materials that we're using as part of Phonathon. But today we will also be tackling issues like remote calling head on, possible other new uses of call centers and what have you. So over to you, Kamalei.
Here we are.
Oh, I'm up first. In fact. Well, listen, I introduced myself, I'm sure, to quite a few of you yesterday, so I won't dwell too long on this. But as some of you may have heard, and as some of you are hearing for the first time today, I have had quite a journey through Phonathon over the last 10 years. Been very blessed to attend a huge number of these conferences and case conferences and others over the last decade or so, as I say. I rose up through the ranks from a lowly student caller at my university here in London once upon a time. I then did quite a bit of outsourced tele-fundraising for a number of charities after university. I ultimately went on to manage my own Phonathon, so I have lived and breathed the trenches that you guys are in on the day-to-day. And therein at King's College in London, I managed a team of about 40 student fundraisers, and we were running all sorts of different interesting campaigns over the 3 years that I was there. And indeed, as we can see on the slide, that I was using VanillaSoft in my job there in order to manage the campaign to success before ultimately jumping ship to VanillaSoft full time. And actually, I work from home full time, so this is actually my day-to-day reality. And the only slightly novel aspect is presenting to you guys today via screen, which would not be my norm, but otherwise business as usual for me. And as you can see on the final bullet point, I am a self-confessed Phonathon fanatic. And for anyone that was listening yesterday, you'll know that as I get a little bit excited about what I'm talking about, the pace of my speech certainly can pick up. So I'll be trying to temper myself from getting too enthusiastic today. Let's see how we go. Over to you.
My name is Kamalei. I work at Pitzer College, one of the Claremont colleges in California, so very close to where Meeting of the Mind should have been. I do not work from home. I am like probably majority of you, where my job is very heavily revolved around students. I think Rachel and I don't know if this is a trend for most people, but I also started off as a student caller at my alma mater, University of Laverne. Somehow ended up here managing. I think everyone just kind of falls into it. And then once you're in it, you realize how fun it is and you can't stop. So 6 6 years and counting of higher ed development experience. Over a little over 3 years of managing my own Phonathon group. We call it our Advancement Ambassador Program. I have a picture of my students down in the left. They call majority of the time. They also have other responsibilities. If you've sat in on a forum before, I've mentioned they participate in our events. They do engagement opportunities. We launched a new alumni discovery program this past spring, which we had to put to a stop for obvious reasons, but I know that's been a growing trend at some institutions, so happy to elaborate on that if we get to that at some point. And some of my other responsibilities in the office, which if you can look at it, all have come to a stop in light of the new changes. So curious to, get the ball rolling on other strategies folks are doing to use their time wisely, and how we can continue to keep our students and our constituents, external constituents, engaged. So that's a little bit about me. I think Rachel and I have talked about this, but we are a little, we're new to this whole forum format of how to host a forum remotely, digitally. So we highly encourage you to open your participants tab and your chats tab. If you have questions or comments, we want to make this interactive as best possible. We don't want to talk at you, we want to talk together, and that can only happen if everyone's typing in the chat, engaging, responding. We'd love to hear what you have to say, so wanted to throw that out there before we move on. Are we ready?
Yeah, we're going to try and create a bit of a chat room feel, guys, so don't hesitate. Please bounce off anything we're saying. If you want to raise any ideas and questions as we go through, if you've got an experience of what we're talking about, good or bad or ugly or pretty or whatever it may be, please don't hesitate. We want you to be as active as possible. Otherwise, this will be a very one-sided panel discussion and round table that we're hosting today. So fingers at the ready, keypads in hand.
Awesome. So our first, I'm sure everyone has talked, and they're more about COVID-19 than they ever wish they would in this conference and just in general. But we wanted to take a Phonathon angle to it. What are folks doing for calling? Has your calling stopped? Most colleges are campuses are shut down, so are we implementing remote calling? If you are, what logistical ramifications have you had to work out? How are you getting around that? All of that. So you have the questions. I don't need to read it for you. It's on the screen, but just throwing it out to the group. What are we doing? What's been helpful? What have we learned? Does anybody have any comments they'd like to share?
And just as we're waiting for you guys to kind of get going with any thoughts and ideas on this particular topic, obviously I'm sort of on the front line alongside our clients in looking at this, and it's absolutely the topic of the moment as it is in our personal and professional lives, facing this question of, to call or not to call. Do we just press full stop on this whole calling operation? Do we try and think creatively about new ways of calling, new uses of the phone? Obviously, there are kind of a number of questions around whether we should be trying to fundraise at this time, ethically and morally, but also practically. The idea of having students processing gifts from home, I think, is one that would certainly raise a few concerns in my mind, but that's not to say that they couldn't, and that's not to say that there's not lots of other potential things that they could be doing. So certainly I've got a few ideas of certain things that we might be able to look at doing with this time. I can see Jodie saying haven't implemented remote calling. I'm assuming it's being talked about at most universities. Would you say, guys, on balance, that this is something that's being considered, or is it just off the table altogether? What are you guys doing at Pitzer, Kamalei?
We have stopped calling. We currently use RNL Campus Call, and I know VanillaSoft operates on a cloud base. You can use any web browser, but Campus Call is not that way, unfortunately. And just with our HR department of employing students while they're away, my students are non-work study, so I know there's like work study, non-work study, logistics that certain people just have different policies, so we've had to stop calling in all other student related employment basically.
And I think there's also this sense from a lot of phone managers' perspective, it's just that like you want to keep your students in work. They didn't sign up for this, and they were expecting to be paid throughout the summer. So even on a kind of a personal level, it would be nice to keep some type of calling going, everything else aside. University of Redlands stopped calling for now. Cal Poly SLO, not sure how we'll implement remote calling as our team of 40 now scattered across the state and country and not returning, which is obviously the situation that so many universities are. It's the same here in the UK, same across Europe. We've got clients there, the same situation. And so Kamalei, as you say, unless you have access to a piece of cloud-based software, it does seem pretty unworkable, if you will. University of Colorado stopped using RNL, so in the same boat, made the decision to pay the callers. Wow. Gosh, I'm sure they love you for that. Wowee, lucky bunch. At the University of Redlands, we shut down early. Semester ends in mid-April anyway, so we only lost a few weeks, and indeed a lot of our clients are in that lucky situation that they were, winding down more or less from a long spring's calling already. Last few weeks of calling, calls of spring and union.
Oh, that's awesome. So, Rachel, it looks like people they're not calling for the most part. Maybe some comments are rolling. Do you have any, since VanillaSoft is a cloud-based platform, do you have any clients that are remote calling now? And if you do, what's working, what's not? Like, what's the pulse on that situation?
So I only have one client that I'm aware of that is continuing as of now in a remote capacity. They have significantly scaled down their team. So obviously any new starting callers this semester are not continuing to work, but they have got a number of more experienced callers, and they are continuing to fundraise for student emergency funds, particularly for students that are in some way specifically affected by the ongoing crisis, which I think makes a lot of sense. Beyond that, I was on the phone to another client yesterday who was very much hoping, for the reason that I said around wanting to keep students in employment over the summer, that they could come up with some idea, but not feeling comfortable with the idea of fundraising right now. And that's obviously going to be a personal decision for all of these institutions, but trying to come up with almost more charitable uses of phone. And I think I popped you an email about that yesterday. There's a lot of charities now doing care calls and check-in calls with the elderly, just calling for a 20-minute chat. So particularly for institutions with older alumni populations, I think that could be a lovely idea. Information calls for students. I mean, obviously online is the easiest way to share information, but again, check-ins with those facing final exams, that type of thing. Anyone using Phonathon students to call potential new students? Interesting.
Cool. We'll touch on this a little bit later in the presentation, but I'm sure your institutions have or are looking at other platforms, channels, other software systems to implement in your strategies. So something we're at Pitzer looking at is to utilize our Thank You platform to send engagement videos, stewardship videos, check-in videos from different members of our cabinet to different constituent groups. So I love that idea of utilizing students' to reach out to potential new students. Maybe that's something, if you have ThankView or if you have a similar platform, or if you could bootleg it somehow.
Yeah.
If you don't want them necessarily calling on the phone, if they could record a video
Yeah.
and you can push that out digitally, that'd be a great idea.
It's true. I think somehow those other channels may seem somehow slightly less intrusive than an actual phone call if it's not a care call or something, you know, specific to this moment. And indeed, in our software, for example, there's a tool called Voicemail Drop, which allows you to drop pre-recorded voicemails, which again, it might be nice just to, you know, Pitzer is thinking of you or whatever it may be, and just kind of a little friendly check-in. Again, I see video content I think could be lovely at this time, anything that would just share a bit of cheer and let them know that the university or college is sort of wishing them well. I think could all be really nice ways to keep your students working without getting into, as Shelby is saying, issues of PCI compliance. I mean, I have to say, that was my first thought when this topic of remote calling came up, and continuing to fundraise in a remote environment was just kind of setting off alarm bells in my mind about just the gift processing aspect. Because, you know, a lot of us have fantastic students that actually maybe we would trust to have a great conversation on their own at home and go through the script in the way we'd like, but just when you get into gift processing, it seems like a bit of a can of worms. Has anybody got any thoughts around PCI in a remote environment? Maybe just getting students to record pledges? Would you just remove the gift processing component? Perhaps. I mean, it seems most people are saying they're just not considering remote calling for all of the ideas and kind of reasons we've discussed. Having students assist with stewarding donors, thank you calls, exactly, thank you emails is a really nice inoffensive thing that you could be doing now, maybe taking this opportunity again to invest some time in doing the types of calls that maybe we don't squeeze in so easily throughout the actual fundraising year. Trying to figure out calling software not cloud-based. Postcards, I thought. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I see the last Ellen has asked, has anyone considered using a call center to augment what they couldn't cover this semester? By call center, are you referring to remote calling, like having a third party do your calling for you?
Oh, okay.
Because I know RNL, for example, offers a third party. I don't know how even if they're offering that now in light of everything going on, but is that what you meant?
I would think that the more personal and authentic and from the institution, the better at this time, wouldn't you, in terms of using it as a real opportunity to connect with alum and students in a difficult time. And so I'd say probably students could be the best people to be making those calls. But as I say, just thinking about a way that we could do that would be conscious of data protection and privacy and PCI and all of these important considerations. But maybe we move this topic on for a moment. Do you think, Kamalei, do you have anything else to say on this? It seems like most of the people on the forum, as we say, are just taking the decision for now, at least, not to call. And I have to say, if you don't have cloud-based software, that could be an obvious decision to make. But I really like this idea of maybe kind of care calls or check-in calls or conversational calls with older alum. And almost starting to give back to the alumni community in a really difficult time, and use the phone for what it does best, which is kind of join people together and create a human-to-human interaction opportunity. Wouldn't it be a great time to call with everybody being at home? Gosh, that's true, isn't it? Yeah, sort of the irony of this of this situation. I mean, out of interest, does anybody, sorry, I've just said to move this on, but out of interest, does anybody have any specific kind of emergency fundraising projects going on at the moment? I know you guys mostly seem to have student emergency funds. Does anybody have anything specific to this current crisis that they could be fundraising for? Because that then sort of gets around the question of is it or is it not appropriate to be fundraising at this time?
Mm-hmm.
We're at Sunny, working on that idea with our admissions team. The only problem is we don't want our students using their own phones to do it, so we're working on a solution. I mean, the great thing about VoIP technologies is that they can just download those types of phones on their computer. So things like Skype for Business, for example, you could set up a university account and all of your students could get set up on Skype or Skype for Business. We have a tool called Connect Me Voice, which again is just like a little calling application in your computer. Most of those you can set up with a caller ID so that again it wouldn't be the student's phone number displaying. You could just have a university number or indeed your number displaying so that if anybody called back it would go to you. Started Emergency Fund, offsite call centre in Wilson Bennett is almost to max capacity as schools still need to meet, and that is the tricky thing, isn't it? You know, we've all still got targets to hit. Students are best, but in a pinch of PCI compliant. Yes, absolutely. And indeed, that's always the question with outsourcing versus in-house in general, that isn't it really, that there's huge benefits to both options, as well as potential pitfalls. Launched a crowdfunding project to support a few selected unrestricted funds that can directly benefit students. Because I'm sure many of your institutions will have, you know, students stuck abroad or, you know, that can't afford to get home or, you know, these types of things that would be very compelling. Giving Day scheduled for next Thursday, and I'm sure you're all ready to go on that. There's so much work that goes into preparing a Giving Day. But hopefully all of that work will sit and wait for you whenever we go live next.
I can
already
relate to that too. We had a giving week scheduled for next week, Monday, and it was in the works for at least 5 months, and we put the brakes on that too. So, okay, I will move on for the sake of time.
We can always come back to this if we end up with time at the end. But thanks so much, guys, I would say, for using the chat panel as actively as you are. As you can see, it's kind of giving us much more of a sense of all being in a room together and not just the two of us speaking at you. So thank you very much. Keep it coming.
So this is kind of a great segue. We've already gotten into this, but additional strategies, projects to be working on while calling is paused. It seems like most people are not calling right now, so we've talked about, you know, other ways to utilize students, but what could you be doing as a manager to improve some of your calling efforts when calling does pick up again? So is anybody reworking their scripts, email copy, training documents, looking into new software systems? I know I sat in on Rachel's demo on Wednesday. It was really nice to learn about VanillaSoft, and when you're in the weeds of annual giving, assuming most of you are in annual giving, it's really hard to pump the brakes a little bit and reassess and evaluate. So does anybody have any program, you know, tweaking projects that they're working on?
I think that's it. You know, generally for a lot of the Phonathon managers and certainly for our clients, it's really only those 2 months in the summer that maybe you're not calling, or even 1 month in the summer that you're not calling, that you have to squeeze this whole review and refresh process into. And if nothing else, as per what I was saying to anybody that attended my session yesterday, was that we can treat this as an opportunity to really step back and look at the whole picture of our Phonathon and think carefully about every little detail and, you know, small changes, improvements that we might make that would allow us to sort of put our best feet forward in the new calling year, whenever that may begin. Just jotted down a few things here, and guys, if you've got any other ideas, please do drop them into the chat box. As I say, my theme, my header for this session on my own notes is review, renew, and redo. Is the theme of the next few months. So as we've said already, just refreshing all of your stewardship materials, and maybe more than that, thinking about above and beyond stewardship materials that you could be coming up with. So emails, obviously, letters, could even be, thinking about creative headers and footers that you could be adding to your email templates for next year, fund information content, video content, as we've been saying, are really nice ideas. Refreshing scripts, I think, is something that we all need to be doing a little bit more often. In terms of reviewing and adding new information to those. Also, maybe if you're not doing this already, taking this time to begin and introduce segment-based scripting is something that I'm really passionate about. So having kind of multiple scripts, and again, that's something it can be hard to find the time to do. What do we see here? What was that question? Anybody else using non-cloud-based calling? What are the ways you are having your students continue to assist? Okay. If anybody does have any more ideas around remote calling, you can feel free to keep popping those into the chat box. Another thing that came up in my session yesterday was kind of the need to focus more, or we can come back to scripting in just a moment, focus more on student training. I think in my mind that's something that is often neglected, or maybe not given quite as much attention as it's due, given that, again, in my opinion, the quality of your team is really the key thing that's going to determine your success, in my mind at least. And so reviewing all of your training materials, thinking about new ways that you can connect them with their fundraising projects and increase their pride in what they're doing and in the university, and of course increase their skill set. Do you do any of those things, Kamalei? Sorry to put you on the spot, but do you have anything interesting that you do in terms of training or connecting students with their fund areas?
Yeah, in terms of training, I think we do a very standard run of the game. What I feel like our team does maybe differently or just well is really involving students in the whole picture of the office. So right now we have students who are engaged in different ways other than calling. They can help with engagement. I know we're trying to launch a forum, like a kind of like a open forum to our alumni where they can ask questions about what's going on at the school. We had to cancel our reunion, so hopping in on a call and talking about that and getting students involved in those kinds of things so they see what the entire office does, I think gives them a little bit more buy-in on why why fundraising is so important, and they're more willing to assist with other things outside of calling but still related to fundraising. Sorry. I don't work from home. This is all new. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. No, really great ideas. And I have to say, I was also really keen on doing that when I was managing a team, at maybe getting members of my team to come in and speak to the students and again, express their appreciation and help them understand how Phonathon fitted into this much, much bigger fundraising picture, and making them feel really, really proud about what they're doing. I think that's a really interesting point that's just been raised about thinking about revamping or I guess increasing the scope of job descriptions. Now that's really interesting from two perspectives. One, a recruitment perspective, so thinking about how we're actually marketing this position to students in terms of the experience they can get, but then obviously giving them that opportunity to gain so much more experience. That I remember, and I'm sure you're the same, Kamalei, when I was doing job interviews after university, my job as a student fundraiser was completely invaluable. All of the questions that you get asked around, talk to me about a difficult conversation or a time where you had to negotiate with someone or whatever it may be. And so I think the more experience we can give the students, the better, so that they can market this experience.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
See what else I have here. Go ahead, Kamalei, while I'm having a quick look at my notes, see if there's anything else on this topic.
So we have a comment about job descriptions, wanting more daytime hours. I think that's a great segue to our next slide if we're okay to move on from this one.
Okie dokie. Let me just have a see. Other things just to wrap up. You could review segmentation, prioritization, and just thinking about a new strategy for the next year. Anything that's going to help with contact rates, getting through to the right people. Again, opportunity to review data and build that into a new segmentation plan. Anything data enrichment, as we talked about yesterday, spend analysis, review of third parties, as we said earlier. And just to quickly answer the question on scripting before we move on and forget that one, I think there are lots of things that you can be doing there to freshen up a script. I mean, for me, I really am into the whole segment-based scripting, so maybe moving from one script to, let's say, just a donor and a non-donor script, or scripting for your different constituencies that, again, would just be a little bit more personal to the individual in question. Thinking about news updates that you might like to give, again, refreshing the information that you're sharing about your fund areas within those scripts, thinking about introducing alumni benefits or upcoming events, although maybe not so many events going on at the moment, but just thinking about any ways that we can add more value to the alum and share information that's going to be meaningful and interesting to them. We love a good long script here in the UK. Next question, over to you.
I had another comment on scripting. So a couple of things we implemented in the past few years. During training, you know, in a standard script, you have your building rapport and you have, I've always seen it, you know, like we fill in, these are some really awesome successes of the college that we want to be pushing out. And what I noticed was that my students would just read over the bullet points in the script, especially when they're newer and they're not as comfortable. And your more talented ones would stray from it, but it's just easy for them to fall into that routine. So in my second semester in the spring, because most of my students just roll over from fall to spring, we actually removed those suggested rapport bullet points and put lines, and I made them sit down and write in their own rapport bullet points. And I feel like that helped them personalize the script and share things that they were really passionate about that they could actually elaborate on. Mm-hmm. And they're all, you know, the more diverse, you know, things you can be sharing on the phone because your students are involved in so many different things, that always works out really well. Another thing we started doing was that at the beginning of every shift, I had everyone go around the room and say one thing happening in their life at Pitzer this week. So some of them are going to different panel discussions, some of them are involved in clubs, some of them involved in athletics. So if they're even just sharing something interesting that they're learning in class, and I had them write that on the board. So people are sharing even more diverse things of things happening currently at the school. So that could be another way to diversify the trip.
Sorry, folks, I'm just letting the cat in. He's clawing at the window. Do bear with me. It's work from home reality. We both have pets crawling around us.
Do we want to read this question?
I think we're ready for the next question. Let me just double check. I might be a couple behind. Yeah, next topic. Revamping job description. General question. Before the coronavirus, we were considering paring back our Phonathon program significantly. Bottom line, people aren't picking up the phone and we aren't being very productive with our time. Has anyone else encountered a similar problem? How have you addressed it? Gosh, that would nearly need an hour and 15 minutes, wouldn't it? I think if I can actually revert you back to if you didn't attend the session that I did yesterday, was very focused on ROI and all of the little steps that you can be taking in order to improve your bottom line, to improve things like contact rates, engagement, participation, increase that maximum gift, bring down spend, and also increase the value of Phonathon beyond the fundraising. So I think that session yesterday could be quite a good option for you with response to that. But of course, you are not alone. By no means are you alone. You know, we all know, we've heard of huge institutions pulling their calling programs over the last couple of years. So I think big and small schools alike are certainly struggling, and telephone fundraising is expensive. You know, at the end of the day, we want to pay our students good wages. We want to have the best software tools and what have you. Line rental and calls are expensive. So ROI is always going to be a challenge, I think, at Phonathon, but there are lots of things that you can be doing to hopefully improve that. Would you add anything to that, Kamalei?
I think you nailed it on the head with that, but yeah, you're not alone. We're going through that as well. I'm sure lots of other schools are. I think that, again, also is a great segue into our next topic of how to utilize students outside of their normal responsibilities. So
there we go.
Basically, reiterating the headline there, how are you maximizing your phone efforts in collaboration with other campus partners? So I think the comment about how somehow involving your students in the admissions process, brilliant. How can we collaborate with other offices? And I think the more we collaborate with other offices, the more we get advancements name out there. Students are more familiar with what the office does. They don't associate it with just fundraising, they associate it with events and engagement and career resources. All of that is really important to what we do as well. So great idea. I don't know if anybody has any other programs that they've been implementing. I know Rachel and I can probably elaborate, but we'd love to hear from you folks. What else are you doing besides calling with your students that you feel like has been helpful to your overall efforts?
And I'm really looking forward to hearing about your alumni discovery initiative. It was sort of new and interesting to me. I think there's obviously going to be a time sensitivity thing at the moment. There are so many interesting uses that students are being put to now, particularly with this new focus on engagement centres is a word and a phrase that I'm coming across an awful lot in my work, just calling lots of universities and Phonathon managers. It sort of seems to be the buzzword of the moment, and event promotion seems to be a really big part of that, signing people up to come to events. Clearly there's probably not going to be too much of that going on this summer, but can we think of other things that we can be doing that might have a more charitable, value-driven focus for the next few months that are very centered in what's going on right now, that seem sensitive and timely based on the situation that we're all in if we are going to keep calling. But then, as I say, once we're back, and do feel free, guys, if you've got any non-traditional uses of your students going in, we would absolutely love to see them going on. Events and reunions calling is something. Major gift prospecting is something that has come up quite a bit recently. People kind of maybe bringing mid-level donors or higher value donors into their calling pools so that perhaps more experienced students can reach out to them, either as a simple point of interaction and kind of stewardship, or to actually book appointments for major gift officers, which I think is a very, very interesting thing that seems to be new. Is that something you're doing at Pitzer, Kamalei? Has that been talked about or tested?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I think any kind of, we try to partner as much as we can with our engagement side of the house. So definitely incorporating event promotion into our scripts, volunteer promotion. So offering other opportunities for constituents to be engaged outside of giving. If they, whether or not they choose to give, we're promoting our different volunteer opportunities. We have a couple that you can participate in regionally. So really trying to push that and connect people back to the school any way that they're willing.
And I think that, even when we are doing, and hopefully before too long, back to our standard sort of Phonathon approach, it's really worth thinking about in terms of increasing the value of phone to not only, the annual fund team, but the wider department. What are all the pieces of information that we can be sharing and also gathering on these calls in order to kind of boost the team effort, particularly around, are they interested in events? What type of events are they interested in? Could they volunteer? If so, what type of volunteering might they be interested in? Would they consider mentoring, speaking at events, these types of things? Have they thought about planned giving? Have they written a will? And those may be questions, again, that you'd only be happy with a more experienced student asking who had been trained to some degree on the idea of planned giving. But again, just thinking about the wider potential value. Oh, we had a hidden post. Sorry, my last post was shown to panelists only. Thought I should repost as I'd like to hear from other schools. I'm glad you did. Has anyone considered using a call centre to augment what they couldn't cover this semester? Using a call centre that works. Oh, I think we did. Oh, of course, we saw that because we're the panelists. No. Exactly what you've said, isn't it? I think we did. Kind of read that out. So hopefully, maybe people did hear that. And indeed, yes, you're absolutely right that a fully trained, albeit remote, call centre operation would certainly come more likely under PCI than a kind of student-led operation. Yeah, interesting to know if anybody is continuing to outsource any calling at this time, or whether that is also on pause.
Sounds like there was a comment earlier about Wilson Bennett is almost at capacity or max capacity, I think it said. So it seems like they have a lot of people hopping on with that feature. I don't know if anybody on this chat right now is utilizing that feature, if they can elaborate on that, or if no one is, I'm sure you could reach out to the Wilson Bennett team. They could probably tell you how that's working.
It'd be interesting to know, sorry, Kamalei, just what type of calls those are. I think I remember the comment, the implication was that they were fundraising calls, because I think the comment was, we've still got targets to hit. Are you fundraising again for specialist projects? Is that business as usual on those calls? It would be quite interesting to know. And I guess if anybody is still calling, are we getting any feedback from alum at this time? What's the reaction from alumni that are still being called? Does anybody have experience of that? Sorry, over to you, Kamalei, again.
No, that's a good question. I think right now, there's a lot of buzz around pushing digital fundraising, launching these crowdfunding platforms that are time sensitive, pushing out emails and social media, all of that stuff. But I don't hear a lot of conversation around calling. And somebody made a good point. Like, everyone's at home. It's a great time to call. But where is the line of sensitivity to being too intrusive? Whereas should we be more aggressive, for lack of a better term, with the way we're getting support at this time when it's really needed?
Yeah.
So, anybody has any thoughts on that?
Also, I suppose the thing we've not talked about in all this is actually the callers and how the callers would feel about fundraising in this climate. Even for me as a speaker, this conference has been quite interesting, trying to come on and be chirpy and energetic and positive in what is, of course, just a really crazy, uncertain time. So I guess we might even have a responsibility to our students to maybe keep them off the phone, as much as we don't want to do that. But hopefully, as we say, depending on the specific nature of the calls that you were making, nobody could question the value of the student making that call.
I guess if you did outsource that to a third party, you wouldn't have to necessarily worry about that.
True.
Paid professionals.
True. They're used to it. They're getting it all day, every day. They're in the trenches, living and breathing it.
But are you connecting with your constituents on that personal level the way a student would it? I mean, that's always the toss-up regardless. So
exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. Okie dokie. Did I have anything else on that? Yeah, I was interested to know about any kind of COVID-specific emergency fundraising that was going on, because, as we say, that is, of course, timely and relevant and sensitive to the moment. But I'm sure that just emergency funds are being sort of reallocated to that end. All righty. I guess maybe on to multi-channel, folks, if we don't have anything else. Oh, we are having students call, which is going very well. Oh, fantastic. Thinking of, you've kept this very quiet, Lindsay. We are having students call, which is going very well. We are thinking of having them make calls to prospective students to help encourage them for the fall. But everything is going well. Yeah.
Lindsay, are they making fundraising calls, or what kind of calls are they making?
True. Thinking of having them make calls. Fundraising for student fund. And are you talking specifically about the current crisis and kind of tying the fundraising to that, or is it still a fairly generic student fund ask? Sorry, Lindsay, all eyes are on you now. The spotlight on Lindsay. I think you seem to be the only person that is calling right now. So indeed, we will all be bowing to you. And again, I would love to know, and apologies, the spotlight's still on you, just what is the feedback? You know, it's been a large topic on the phones, lots of conversation around it. Gosh, I mean, isn't it everywhere? I can hardly talk about anything else, even with my own parents at the moment. Less money coming in, but less students able to call.
I'm curious, how are they are you using a software? Are you manually sending out lists to them? How are they processing gifts? That's what I'm
Oh my goodness.
curious about.
Tell us everything, Lindsay.
Tell us
Tell
everything.
us your ways. And interesting. I think here in the UK, the remote calling topic hasn't even come up. It's interesting. That is not even being looked at by any of our UK or European clients.
Students able to come into work.
Which is some students able to come into
Okay.
work.
Okay.
Some still on campus. Social distancing measures. Gosh.
Nice. Okay. So we're continuing from home. Oh.
Panelists only and not attendees. Oh
yes.
dear, yes,
Sorry.
that's true. Sorry, we should have been reading these out more audibly, but I think we have to an extent. Just to kind of summarize, Lindsay and her team have got students calling. They are fundraising for student support and student funds. COVID and the corona issue has been a large topic on the phones. It's coming up a lot, as it is in all avenues of our life. Less money coming in, less students available to call, but they actually do have some students still coming into campus with social distancing measures in place, of course. So that's interesting. I haven't heard of any other campuses where students are still kind of coming and going, even to that small extent. But Lindsay, it looks like you are going to be very popular after this webinar, and I think everybody is going to want to lean on you and your experience as you are bravely carrying on.
Which is good. That was the point of this session, was to identify these brave souls. George Fox University, awesome.
Oh my goodness, so you're going to log off this session to 100 emails, Lindsay. Well, actually, there's only 28 participants, so at least 28, I would think.
Lindsay, I'm going to copy and paste your message and send it to all the group because it has your email in it, and I think you only sent it to us originally. So Kathy, I think that's how to it. So question, is it even appropriate to have our student callers reach out to donors, alumni from students' private phones? Is that awkward and or allowable to share donor contact info? Would we expect our students to be armed with all the info/resources related to current campus closure, etc.? Thanks for any help. I personally, this is exactly the roadblock my team and I ran into. I personally did not feel comfortable having my students use their cell phones. I mean, we kind of talked about this. What position are we putting our students in? What are we asking of them? Because just like everybody else, they're going through this with their families. I know Pitzer specifically is mostly, or we have a lot of students who are from out of state. So it's not a commuter school where people are local to the area. You know, people are all over the country. So how do I, as a manager, manage a team, you know, a few students in Seattle, a few students in New York, a few time zones, things, all of that nature. Data, just privacy, security. Are we I can easily upload a list of contacts that they can call on a Google Sheet, but is that the most secure way to be handling our, our confidential information? I don't necessarily think so. We use Blackbot NXT. It's a cloud-based database, so maybe there's, questions there, but yeah, there's just a lot of, I think, logistical things that are hard to work out if they're remote. I don't know, Rachel, if you have any comments on that.
I think there's a lot of really interesting points in that one question. So thank you for that, Kathy. For me, I think the only thing that I think is possibly insurmountable is the PCI aspect. That's the only bit that I can't quite get my head around, is the actual GIF processing. I certainly wouldn't have students calling from their mobile phones. I don't think that is appropriate, just in case they forgot to withhold their number or whatever it may be, and suddenly the alum has the student's phone number. In that case is what I would be very concerned about. But as we say, VoIP technologies, think about Skype for Business, Skype, all sorts of these sort of online calling applications that could help with that. Beyond that, technology more broadly, and some of you sat through maybe a quick VanillaSoft demo on Wednesday, so I don't want to go into this in too much detail, but just to speak to what is possible within our software, and I'm sure many others. Firstly, that kind of the cloud-based aspect, and the fact that the student would have their own soft phone or VoIP phone displaying a university number, which would all be kind of secure, and you would then be able to remote onto those calls from a lot of piece of calling software that the supervisor can actually remote onto the call and listen. You can see which of your students are on the phone, even in your virtual call center. We have a tool called Call Whispering, and we also have instant messaging, which allow you to pass advice and suggestions to the student, which is what I was kind of thinking about when you were saying about arming them with all the info and resources that they need, because that's the other thing that is really awful to think about, is that a student would be sat at home on their own and maybe have somebody that's really annoyed to be called, being asked some really difficult questions. And that, alongside PCI, I think is the hardest thing to think about, is just making sure that your students don't end up in a sticky situation on the front line without the resources to deal with that. But again, if they could instant message you, for example, and say, look, I'm on a different call, a difficult call, help, you remote on and then kind of listen. Again, technology, I think, will be our saviour for anybody thinking about remote calling, but it certainly doesn't get around all of the issues. What else have we got? Kamalei moved some of our on-site management programs over to allow callers to call from home. No gifts. Is that CC? Is that no credit cards? So no credit cards being processed. Screen manager technology. Interesting. Again, so the student could be kind of sharing their screen. Is that what that is? So that you can actually talk to me about screen manager technology, in case I'm misunderstanding that. But is that you kind of remoting onto the student's screen from home? Interesting.
Is there a platform, Rob, that you're using, specific platform that you're using for that? What is the name of, what is the platform called?
Tell us more, Rob. Tell us your ways. Also allow you to, thank you, Rob, researching furiously. It will also allow you to lock them down to just the calling software and also watch them work through the records. Oh, interesting. Although, of course, the only thing that doesn't exclude is still them just writing it down on a piece of paper, the old-fashioned way, isn't it? And that's the hard thing, is you don't want to think this of your students, but just the reality is, if we're sharing card information in a remote environment, the risk of something untoward happening with that card information is, I think, more than I could personally stomach if it was my calling operation. But that is not to say is that we couldn't be signing people up for pledges and sending out pledge emails, directing people to the website to fulfill their gift. And you lucky folks in the US do pretty well on pledge fulfillment.
Screen Connect, looks like.
Screen Connect. Thank you, Julian Foster.
Never heard of that.
Screen Connect. No, we're all going to go and busily look at Screen Connect. They're going to get 20 inbound leads this afternoon as everybody signs up for a demo of Screen Connect, including myself, to see what that's all about. But yeah, any ability to remote onto a screen, even Zoom, Zoom, you can do that. Zoom facilitates screen sharing, and then that component of remoting onto the actual call, I think it is really important, even just so that the student knows that you could be listening. I think is quite compelling. Just the thought for them that you could log on to that call at any time and they wouldn't know, and again that would hopefully help to focus their concentration in the same way as if they were in the call center. Easy, get in touch. Fantastic. About having the control. Yeah,
definitely.
That's it. But then, as we say, on the flip side, protecting our callers who would be very much on the front line. And indeed, I'm sure even major gift fundraisers are feeling quite on edge. I mean, out of interest, I'm sorry, I know this is a major gifts conversation, but are universities still major gift fundraising at the moment? Is fundraising in other teams going on as usual? Kamalei, do you know what your colleagues are doing in other teams?
I think right now we are working with our major gift donors, if they didn't already have something in place, directing them to our student emergency fund. We already had an emergency fund created a couple years ago, so that was an easy thing to resurface and promote. We also had a COVID-19 relief fund. I believe is non-restricted, so it goes, student emergency fund only goes to students, but our school has chosen to continue to pay our dining hall staff, our facility staff who can't work right now that the school is shut down. So a fund to help alleviate some of those financial pressures.
Gosh.
So those are a couple focuses we have right now.
That could be an interesting thought if you're deciding that you are going to go for this remote fundraising approach in some capacity, is maybe getting a Zoom-based training session from one of your major gift fundraisers about fundraising in crisis, the specific responsibilities and sensitivities of fundraising in a time like this, and someone that's speaking to them as a peer. I'm also trying to fundraise in this time. We're hoping that you can fundraise in this time. Could be really interesting to kind of, again, join the dots there and think about how colleagues in other teams might be able to lend a hand with this and give a different perspective.
Shall we move on to our last slide? Is this a good?
What was our last slide? Remind me.
Multi-channel strategy. So I think it.
Oh goodness. Okay. Yes.
Good segue. So personally, our team we have all different kinds of softwares that we're using. Channels, texting, we have crowdfunding, we have ThankView, we have phone, we are really keen on building out our social media strategies. So I am personally not as worried about our fundraising dollars, not getting made up somehow, because we have implemented other strategies. We use ThroughText. Love using ThroughText. They are a completely cloud-based software, so I can easily, we can assign our volunteers or students different texting campaigns. Once now that our crowdfunding pages are live, we're definitely looking at building out our texting strategies, even engagement using texting to communicate to alumni how they can how they can engage in these forums that I talked about a little bit earlier. So it's a great time, I would say, if you haven't looked into other channels, or if you don't have a software system like VanillaSoft that has other communication channels built into it. It's a great time to look into that, because if you bank so heavily on one channel like phone or email, and something like this makes it go awry, how are you going to make up for those dollars? So Ellen, what are you using a vendor for texting? And if so, whom? We use the parent company is called GetThrough, but the texting platform is called ThroughText. We've been using them for a little over a year now, and they're awesome. I highly, highly recommend them. Very affordable as well. So definitely, they've been, partners in this conference. So I look into them. But
I think it's worth remembering that phone is the most expensive channel. Phone calls cost a lot of money and time, and actually multi-channel makes total sense in this environment where fundraising is getting more and more expensive. And just thinking about making phone albeit a large part of a much bigger picture of Phonathon, which brings all of these interesting different touch points into the sort of journey that we're trying to take somebody down in phone. And I think now, as we're saying, is a perfect time to step back and really think about that journey, think about how you could be more creative in using all of these different channels and building a sort of body of touch points that you can sprinkle into your Phonathon outreach to keep it fresh and interesting, as engaging as possible for alumni. I think everybody's trying to sort of break through the noise in whatever way they can, and anything that you can do that might be slightly more engaging and different than what you did last year. Does anybody have any just kind of really novel or interesting or unusual engagement touch points going out? I don't know, really creative direct mail pieces or interesting use of video. I have to say I have zero experience of crowdfunding, but it seems to me that this must be the age of crowdfunding above everything else. I can see that continuing to work really well even in this type of crisis. Listen to you make me blush. Stop it. I would love to come to Miami. I'm sure it's much warmer than it is here in London, although we have been blessed with sunshine this week, which is a huge blessing given that we're all pent up at home. Kind of like Oxford in England. Well, we do have a client in Oxford, England, so it would be fantastic to come and visit somebody in Oxford, Miami. Oxford OH. I'm terrible with my US geography. I'm going to move swiftly on from this point. How do you recommend presenting these other channels to leadership if they're considering eliminating phone centre altogether due to low ROI? Well, as we said, many of these channels will be cheaper than phone. So from a spend perspective, it may not be as difficult a conversation as you were thinking. In theory, having this multi-channel approach should significantly increase contact rates, which is also going to increase the overall efficiency of your campaign spend and therefore your ROI. So it should be that actually introducing these other channels is going to increase that ROI rather than reduce it. All about donors, there's no way you can make up the donors. Is that responding to something else? What about donors now that we... I see, maybe that's just a response in terms of eliminating phone centre. I wonder, Rob. Certainly there is absolutely no better way to acquire donors. There is no better way to upgrade donors than phone. Phone will always be the best tool for those things. It is expensive, but in many cases you will see a 10 times better response rate to phone than you would to direct mail, for example. And direct mail is not cheap either. I mean, I have to say I've only ever worked on Phonathon, but Stanford has brought phone back. I heard that recently. Yes, they needed the donors, of course, not so much. Yes, it is the best way to bring on new donors at those low-level gifts, and thinking about getting them to take that first step on the donor journey, be that a $10 gift as it may be. Has there ever been talk of pulling the Phonathon at Pitzer, Kamalei?
Definitely not pulling it, but we've scaled it back a lot in just
Really?
my time here. Um, yeah, our contact rates continue to decline, and I think a lot of it has to do with our, collecting accurate phone numbers. So people are constantly canceling their landlines, they're changing their cell phone numbers, and with all the scam calls that have been going out, people just don't want to pick up the phone anymore. So I think the sad reality is, how can we be smarter about updating and collecting data? I think is a big part to improving our phone systems. To respond to the how do we get leadership to buy in to signing up for these other channels, I'll just use texting as an example. I proposed to launch our first texting campaign around our Giving Day. We do Giving Tuesday every year, and I think it was perfect because it's time sensitive. It's short, quick messaging. You can't have the meaningful conversation you would over a phone through a text, but around a Giving Day, you don't really have time to be calling people all day long, and hopefully someone will pick up. So texting is a little bit more of a quick response. So that was a great way to sell it. Also, when you use texting, you specifically through text, you upload a list, and they'll tell you which numbers are landlines, which numbers are no longer valid. So it's a great way to update your contact information. And then also when you're texting people, if they don't recognize the phone number, they may not answer. But if they're texting you and you say, "Hey, Rachel, it's Giving Tuesday. Would you like to give?" And they're like, "This isn't Rachel. You have her mom's number, or you have the wrong number." So it's a great way to get a two-way, conversation going versus just calling a phone and hopefully someone will answer, tell you that you have the wrong number. So I think that's a great way to get leadership to buy in as we continue to go through this kind of data. I would say just a little bit of a struggle with how quickly people's contact information change.
And again, thinking about that just wider topic of increasing the value of phone beyond the fundraising. And I kind of said that almost as a moot point in my session yesterday, that the ideal scenario that we get our phonathons into is one in which, even if we didn't raise a penny, the university would still think it was a really useful and important activity within the sort of overall alumni journey, as utopian as that may seem. One other thing that I wanted to bring up on the multi-channel topic, and I'd be interested to know what anybody makes of this, but the kind of difference between a mass marketing approach to multi-channel versus a much more tailored and personal approach to multi-channel. So I think a lot of universities now are building all of these channels in. They're using mass texting, they're using mass emailing, they're doing their telephone-based fundraising. But they are quite isolated, and it is a blanket approach to each of those channels, versus a lot of software now does allow you to be much more dynamic in the way that a professional fundraiser or salesperson such as myself has to be, in balancing between different channels and working out what is not most engaging in general for our alumni body, but what is most engaging for this individual alum, and allowing your students to have these various different channels at their fingertips and at their disposal in order to almost play detective with each alum and work out, right, they're not picking up their phone, I've called them 3 times, let me pop them a video, I'll try calling them again, and then let me send them a text message and then an email and what have you, in order to try and again work out what is going to be the preferred option for that individual. But again, software paving the way for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. With annual giving, we have so many different avenues that we are soliciting our donors off of, or our constituents off of. I'm curious, I know we're still refining how we track where gifts are coming in and really analyzing our constituents. What channels do people resonate with? How can we slice and dice people so we're not calling everybody and emailing everybody and mailing everybody? Like, how can we be more targeted and specific? And it's a science for sure. I'm curious if anybody in the group has a certain kind of strategy that they utilize to really target their constituents in the ways that they want to be communicated to.
That's it. And it's another thing that will, and we are getting quite close to the end of our session today, guys. It has flown by from this side, but another kind of benefit of engaging people by their chosen means is that generally your spend will come down because, for example, you're not wasting your time trying to call somebody that does not want you to call them. If someone explicitly says, I want to receive texts and emails, actually heeding that advice is probably more likely to get a gift out of them out of respect, and hopefully save you the money of trying to reach them by phone. So a more kind of personal approach to capturing contact preferences and heeding them. Now, Kamalei, we were going to open the floor to questions. I wonder if you could pop it all the way to the final slide so that people could see our contact information, lest they want to follow up after the fact with either of us. Does anybody have any burning questions, dare I say, on any topic at this stage? We do have about 5 minutes left. If anybody wants to raise any final thoughts, questions, queries, related, unrelated, within reason, of course. And I would say thank you all so much for partaking and for being so active with your keyboards. You have made our lives and our jobs much easier today in terms of keeping a conversation going.
That was our biggest fear, was having to talk to ourselves for an hour and 15 minutes.
That's what I was saying. If nobody asks any questions, we're just going to have to play like talk show hosts and just do a lot of back and forward, a lot of ping pong. What do you think? What do I think? So you've made our lives much easier today, guys, and also shared loads and loads of really useful information. Not going to call out any names, but we certainly have a few people very active in the comments that I'm sure will be followed up with afterwards. And Lindsay, thank you for providing your email. I've got no doubt that lots of people will be in touch to hear about your brave ongoing calling efforts. And guys, I think this is just a time for us all to keep in touch and keep brainstorming together. Certainly I'm trying to keep in touch with all of our customers at the moment as best I can and share ideas and brainstorm and just be there for each other as we're all trying to be, again, personally and professionally. And I think this conference has been a fantastic opportunity for us all to kind of get together and realise that, again, as outside of the call centre, we're all in this together and kind of tackling this challenge as a group, as a community.
And I will say I am by no means an expert at any of this myself. So if my email's right there, if you feel like you have some ideas that you could share with me that we could use at Pitzer, that would be awesome. I think, Rob, you had lots of great comments. If you wouldn't mind popping your email in there, you shared a couple software systems, and you just had lots of thoughts of, I'm sure people would want to contact you as well.
I have to say I have a feeling as to who Rob might be, but it'd be interesting to see whether the email address confirms that. I could be mistaken. Oh, here he is. I thought it might have been. Rob, thank you so much for all the information you've shared. I particularly like that bit about phone numbers and email signatures and helping you to get through to mobile phones is a very sneaky little Rob at vanillasoft.com. You're hired. We'll have you. Oh, it's been fantastic, guys. I really hope that you all enjoy the rest of your conference. As I say, let's all keep the conversation going on LinkedIn, by email, as best we can. I'm sure I'll be on a few sessions with the rest of you towards the end of this conference. But from my side, thank you all so much for your time and wishing you absolutely lovely weekends and the best of luck with all your fundraising or whatever activities you choose to run over these next few months.